All right, well, I'll start. If you're there, the session is titled Feature Flag Football with Azure App Configuration. My name is Brian McKeever. I am co-owner at BizStream, and I will start very quickly with a little bit about myself as soon as I can get this focused in the right area. So BizStream is a software development shop in West Michigan. We're near Grand Rapids, Michigan, and actually in a little tiny suburb called Allendale, Michigan, and that's important for the talk in a second. My role at BizStream is many. It's probably the short way to say it, but I'm actually a solution architect. My background is technical. I've been doing .NET development since it was classic ASP, and all the way into .NET Full Framework and .NET Core, and do a lot with Azure. Our customers at BizStream need websites and applications that are big enterprise heavy class sites that do lots of fun things, integrations, e-commerce, talking to CRMs, ERPs. They're kind of big applications, and they're also big marketing sites for some well-known national brands. And we do that with content management systems. We've done it with other non-content management systems just from the ground up. But basically, it's always been in .NET, and we've been doing it for 20 years now. In fact, our 20-year anniversary was this past month on October 1st. I'm pretty proud of that. And my role as a solution architect is to help kind of transfer the technical needs of our clients back to our tech teams that we have here at BizStream, but also speak the business and marketing side as well, and get into all sorts of fun things that these websites need to do. So I'm also a Kentico Experience MVP and Kentico Content MVP, one of the few people in the United States that has that title for my knowledge on those platforms, because that, again, is what we build our websites with. So I've got some information about myself on the side, but honestly, that's probably all I'm going to mention about it, because I'm more interested in telling a story today. My goal for the session is to introduce the concept of feature flags and how they work with Azure App Configuration. It's an Azure service that Microsoft provides through Azure, and it's pretty darn cool. And I actually did that with a Blazor application. So I'm going to show how I did that in a real-world scenario and how it went or didn't go so well for me. It's actually a story about how I failed, and it's because I didn't use something like feature flags to accomplish it, and I'll get into that as well. But I thought that would be kind of cool to actually tell you that, nobody's perfect, things can go wrong, and I wish I would have known about this technology, because honestly it would have saved the day for me as opposed to what happened in my little story that we're going to go through. And I will admit, I did lie a little bit. I just couldn't resist the title of feature management, tying it to flag football, because I'm a big football fan. But you know what? Even though the title of the session is Feature Flag Football with Azure App Configuration, I am not going to talk at all about football. In fact, I'm going to talk about CrossFit, which is funny. And if there's any CrossFit people in the audience, maybe you'll enjoy this a little bit. But I work out a lot, do CrossFit exercises probably 5-6 times a week. It's something that's been really beneficial to me on my personal side of things, helped me lose a little weight, get in shape, and it's actually kind of a lot of fun. And we do CrossFits and we do crazy stuff, right? So this is me and my business partner, Mark. He's the co-owner at BizStream, carrying 225 pounds of weight, 400 meters down a paved cement driveway. And it was very not fun. Also me jumping on top of a 24-inch box carrying dumbbells. I don't know what the heck I do half the time doing this, but this ties into the technology, I promise you. It's something that I think is a nice way to narrate why feature management can help you in a scenario. Because here's what happened. I wanted to build this app to solve a problem. I got pretty far into it, and then just like that guy, I completely failed. It completely bombed me right at the live production rollout of the solution, and I'm here to tell you why and maybe how to prevent that from happening in your daily lives or careers or whatever you're doing for your job. And I thought I'd have to explain a little bit about the context and the scenario of that first, to kind of drive home the technology that I'm going to walk through and talk about some of the code and some of the Azure connections. So to set the scene a little bit, let me tell you about what happened at CrossFit Allendale. We have something that we put on as a fundraiser, and it's called CrossFit Rowling. And that's because you take a row machine, as we're seeing here on the screen, and you kind of put it in a bowling format. There's 10 frames that you row, and the idea is for each frame, you're trying to hit 100 meters on the dot on this machine. And if you've ever done a row machine in any exercise, that's not easy to do, because as you pull the rope, Sometimes you pull hard, sometimes you don't pull hard, and the number can kind of, it's not up to you. It's more what the wheel is doing that you're spinning. But to try to get it to stop exactly in a certain number, there's actually a little bit of a skill about how hard or how not hard you pull the rope. So we did this fundraiser because we had a couple community members at CrossFit Allendale that actually were going through some tough times. They had some cancer diagnosis. We're trying to raise some funds to support that family and kind of have our community show up strong and do this. So we actually had a rolling fundraiser at the gym, and we needed a way to tell that there were going to be multiple teams of 5 people, each rowing 10 different times, and for every number meter off or on that you hit the 100, that's your score. So actually, I'll go back a second. In frame 1, if I roll 101 meters, my score would be 1. If I rolled like 95 meters, my score would be 5. So we need to keep track of, is it a 5 or a 1 or a 0 each of the 10 times? And of course, the technology person in me was like, well, man, we need to do this with a leaderboard. We need to see all these teams are going. I think we had like 12 or 13 teams rowing at this thing, maybe even 19 or 20. I can't even remember now. And I wanted to know, are we going to beat the other teams or not? Because, there's some bragging rights on the line. And that's half of CrossFit. The first rule of CrossFit is you always talk about CrossFit, which is why I'm doing that in a session today. And the second rule is it's a competition. You're trying to work and better yourself. So I thought, why not? Why not the week before the main event, try to learn a brand new technology like Blazor. And at the time, Blazor was brand new. It had just came out. And I thought, why couldn't we just put a real-time leaderboard up on the wall with a projector that is actually this app that you're seeing here? And this is what I built on nights, the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday night before the Friday event at home, kind of by myself as quick as possible. And I need to have as the least amount of infrastructure as possible as well. So I went with Blazor because it was something new. I went with some other technologies to make it where it was serverless, so that would be fast to deploy. So I could just basically make a commit to GitHub, see my Blazor app update. And I also needed a way to manage all the team data or the content around the teams. Because as you can see here, this is a screenshot leaderboard. The first 3 places, they each had a team name. There was a team image that represented the team, and then there was a score that we had to track for each team along the way. And I'll get into that in a second, but that's what I needed to do. So I needed an app with some logic. I needed some content to power the logic, and I didn't want to be bogged down with infrastructure. So all of that is the context of what I needed to do. Now I'm going to get into one thing that would have been super nice if I actually had it, because the sad part is when I launched the app, I did not think of it well enough that, hey, the screen on the projector on the wall needs to be live updating. And when I look at updating it from my phone standing on the ground of one team and then the other team, multiple people's phones connecting and updating it, well, no one's up there on the projector refreshing the screen. So I tried at the last minute to make this dashboard automatically refresh by itself. And in pushing the last commit up to right before I had to go to the event, I broke it and it became static and it didn't actually update unless I actually closed down the application and started it back up. Now, luckily, this is an Azure App Service, so I could hit start and stop pretty easily. But I kept it going manually during the event. But it was a bummer because I actually wanted it to just update itself, and I didn't test it well enough with multiple devices trying to hit it at the same time and thinking about who's the person who's going to be updating the screen. So, hey, that's what happens when you go fast. And I failed. But if I would have had something that maybe I could have, instead of rushing and deploying and hoping the feature worked, maybe I could have deployed the feature by itself and not worry about if I had to have to deploy right before the timeline and not shoot myself in the foot. And that is where feature flags come into play. So feature flags are a way to kind of handle toggling on and off certain functionality in software that you can kind of control independent of just deploying new code changes out to a server. At least that's the way I like to think of them. So this is kind of something that it's not just purely a Microsoft Azure thing. It's actually kind of a general tool in a lot of software development methodologies that can be used in many languages. But recently, well, not recently, in the last year or two, Microsoft has actually kind of invested a little bit into a package called the Microsoft Feature Management Library. And also they've added a new resource type in Azure called Azure App Configuration to be able to kind of do certain things with feature flags. So I thought, why not walk through what it takes to add feature flags to a piece of code to show you how to kind of either deploy things or not deploy things, and not have to worry about, am I going to break something, or do I need to deploy something again to fix something? Maybe I can actually just have a way to turn features on and off. Like, think of like a menu. Maybe I have a new menu item in my app that I want to put behind just turning on and off a switch, because maybe only certain users need it, or maybe I only want it to go live at a certain time in the future. This feature flag idea kind of allows all that possibility to start to happen without having to worry about making a deployment and possibly breaking other things. So that's what feature flags are for. And I've talked a whole lot, so I thought maybe let's just jump into a quick demo of how those features actually look like. And I'll show you, I've actually made, past the event, I've made some feature flags in order to simulate how I would have fixed the situation that I actually failed in. So I'm going to drop out a second and show you the Azure portal, which I'm assuming you can see now at this point. Make sure that's still the case. Yeah, it looks like it. And in the Azure portal, I have provisioned an Azure App Configuration resource. The Azure App Configuration resource is pretty simple, actually. The thing that kind of matters the most is the feature manager over here in the operations aspect of the resource. And I have a couple different feature flags set up. I have one flag called live reload, because again, I'm trying to have something that adds a feature to live reload the dashboard by itself every couple minutes or every couple seconds, whatever the time is, doesn't matter. And I actually have it more than once. And that's because I have a label that is associated to the feature. So that way I can have a second dimension that I can control and kind of maybe make this a little bit more dynamic than purely a is something true or false. What I'm actually doing here with these feature flags is saying that I have one live reload feature that's meant for development and one that's meant for production. Because again, maybe you have multiple environments and maybe you want to be able to test a feature in one development environment or UAT or stage environment, but also have it kind of behave differently in production, because maybe you want to deploy it but turn it off in production while UAT is still going on where it's turned on. So that's where the labels come into play. You can kind of add that second dimension. The most common one is like the environment that you put in there, or maybe it's a business unit. Maybe it's a multilingual website where you have different regions where you want to have some features turned on per region. You might have like North America as the label, or LATAM, or Asia Pacific, or something like that. Then obviously there's the enabled checkbox. That's whether or not the feature is turned on or not. So right now this screen is representing that live reload is enabled for development, but it's actually disabled for production. And then the first one at the top is kind of the parent feature. And these actually used to be tied a little bit tighter in the user interface of the portal, but Azure's updated some things so that it's not quite as clear in my mind as it used to be. But this would be like, what if I wanted to have one feature that would go across all of my different environments, or all of my different business units, or different locales? That's kind of what this is set up to do if there's no label, right? So I'm not really going to use that one a ton, but generally that's why there's 3 live reload features or flags. Now, the flag itself, what it does, what it's named, that's totally up to you. You can call it anything you want, and you can use it in any way you want, and I'll show you that next. But that's the first set of basics. Is the Azure App Configuration allows you to create named flags. And this is only one option, but this is a really good option, because then you have a nice SaaS-based interface to kind of configure things on or off. You can also do it in another way, or another 2 different ways. And I'm going to show that in a second. But from the beginning, I mean, what this does is now I can call into a very specific URL, ask for a flag by name, and have it return true or false. And we can put that in our code base and have it kind of be a sort of dynamic setting in the code base that isn't just powered by a local config file. It's actually powered by something you can like toggle on and off. So I think that's pretty cool. So that's the first part of the demo, to show some of that. Let me come back to here. And let's talk about what it means to use those flags in code, okay? To do this, you need 2 NuGet packages. Well, actually, in theory, you only need one if you only purely want to use the feature management library that Microsoft has made available for .NET Core, which you can do. You can actually use feature management by itself. I'll talk about that in 1 second. But generally, to get started with this, you're going to need two NuGet packages. You want the feature management package, and you also want the Azure App Configuration package. That's the thing that will allow you to tie it to the Azure resource very easily. So that's something that you can just install these two packages, and you're kind of off and running. And what that does is actually provide you a starting point that in your startup pipeline or your middleware of your .NET Core or .NET 5 or .NET 6 app, it's whether it's Blazor, a Razor MVC, or something else. Basically, it starts like this. You can actually set up app.settings.json to have feature management the way that this is defined in this quick example, where you have different features. And this example is like feature T, feature U, feature V. And you can have some, is it on or off, always on or not? I'll get into that in a second. But this is the basics of using features and defining them in app.settings.json. However, if you only did this level and you only had the one package and you only set up features locally, you wouldn't get the full benefits of feature flag management, in my opinion. Because again, you'd have to change code, or you'd have to edit a file on a server or edit a file in Azure PaaS to make a change. And we're trying to avoid that. We're trying to avoid any kind of deployment process with enabling or disabling functionality. So you could start here. This is one simple example, but what it really comes down to is by adding these NuGet packages and getting feature management, by adding the library of using feature management in your startup.cs, you're going to want to, in configure services, do the add, services.add feature management. That's the first step. What that says is it starts telling your application that we're going to use features, and it's really the thing that sets it up to pull from where the features are coming from. Okay. Then further inside of your startup.cs, you would actually, inside of configure, this is the part where you're starting to tie using it to the Azure App Configuration. And if you look kind of right in the middle of that source code, this is the line that jumps out. We're actually saying we want to use Azure App Configuration, and that's the thing that kind of makes the code aware that our features might pull from somewhere else. But there's actually a little bit more to it. So to make it sort of fully functional and to make sure that it dynamically refreshes, you start by saying I'm going to use Azure App Configuration, but then you actually have to configure the Azure App Configuration. So inside of Create Host Builder, which is the main sort of place that your .NET 5 or 6 or .NET Core app starts, this is the complex part. This is the part where you actually say, hey, where is my Azure App Config resource in the Azure world? How often am I going to ask for updates? Should I cache things? Should I not cache things? And by the way, should I even use feature flags or not? So inside of Create Host Builder, this is again in your program.cs file, you're going to want to add in a webbuilder.configure Azure App Configuration line. And if we zoom in on that a little bit, this is the part where we're actually saying I'm going to connect, and maybe I'm going to pull the connection string that the Azure portal gives me to talk to my resource. I'm going to pull that from an environment variable or a secret file or key vault. You can do that from wherever. That's that third line there. But I'm also saying, you know what? I'm going to refresh based off of Sentinel, which is just did something change or not really, on a certain time period or expiration, and look for, did those features toggle on or off in the Azure portal? So yes or no. I'm going to look, in this example, I'm going to look for it every 1 minute, right? And that is where, again, having the variable of the connection string matters. The sample environment variable could be set so it's not in your source control by using a PowerShell command that's kind of lower down at the bottom of the screen. That's one way to do it. Or again, key vault would be another thing. Don't have your secrets right in your code. It's kind of the message there. And then we want to set up the fact that we do actually want to make it dynamic and ask for refresh or updates just in case. In a real world production environment, you wouldn't maybe ask for every 1 minute. Maybe you'd cache it for 30 minutes, an hour, 4 hours, whatever that time is. But for the sample here, we do actually want it to ask it to refresh. And again, sorry, I went a little too fast. If you did want to do pulling things from Key Vault, here's an example of that. It's really kind of the middle parts of where the options. That's one kind of cool thing about the NuGet packages is the options are pretty dynamic. There's a lot of different ways to do it. Well, there's like 4 different ways to do it, I guess. But that's how you would kind of set up to talk to Key Vault from finding all those properties. And then the feature flags itself, again, kind of going back, and I know I'm kind of jumping around this code a little bit, but the feature flags themselves have options for the label we went through, right? That scenario where I said I have a development live reload feature flag and I have a production live reload feature flag. So that's right in the middle of this chunk of code. And it's the fact that I'm actually pulling the ASP.NET Core environment of the running code, and I'm associating that to the label property. So opt.label equals development if you're running in VS Code locally, or production if you have the production environment variable set in your Azure App Service or wherever you're hosting your app. So that's the thing that actually says, make sure that I don't look at just any flag called live reload. I actually want to look at the development of the running code. So that's how you would do that. Okay. Now, all of that configuration needs somewhere to be put into an app, right? And as I said in my scenario, I'm using Blazor for the application. This is the high-level overview of Blazor, in case you haven't heard from it. In like 4 or 5 days from now, .NET 6 is coming out with a new amazing update to Blazor's performance. But basically, it's something that you can either run Blazor server-side or run Blazor client-side with WebAssembly. So it integrates tightly with the browser. It uses some SignalR communication to do that behind the scenes. But the main benefit, the promise, is that C# developers who don't love JavaScript or don't want to be fully in React and Angular and Vue or the next one that comes out tomorrow, because yes, there's another framework every other day, it seems like. It's something that we can reuse our C# skills. And I am firmly in this camp, by the way. I really love using C#, but I don't really love using a ton of JavaScript frameworks. They're basically kind of coming out with this new framework that it really looks like this. So as a most simple example possible, I really like Scott Hanselman's blog. He's got an example of this kind of laid out. And the idea is that on the left of this Razor file, we have a simple counter that makes up the screen on the right here. It simply says there's a button with a class of button primary that has click me as the label. And when you click that button, it runs a function in the client side. And here we're using the @functions syntax to kind of say, here's some code. And look, it's actually C# code. But you know what? It's going to run based off when the client click me button is clicked. And it's going to increment that counter. And we have that counter of current count :0 that is bound in the HTML DOM to the server-side property of @current count. So when we increment that, SignalR takes that, communicates it up, and returns it back and overwrites the DOM element, and we'll actually see the DOM element go from 1, 2, or 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 every time we click that button. And that's the promise of Blazor, is that it's kind of doing that for you, again, when you're using the Blazor server-side version, which is the version I was using. All right. So I had this issue and this thing to do right when I was actually working on the CrossFit Rowling tournament thing I was doing. And Blazor was brand new at that point. It had just come out. Now, since then, it's actually come a long way. They've been many releases through the .NET 5 and then into .NET 6. But generally, this is the idea. However, this whole talk isn't really just about Blazor, which it could be, but I'm still talking about feature flags mostly. So I'm just doing highlights of Blazor in case you haven't seen it yet. But by now, I hope you have. But I also mentioned I didn't want to be kind of bogged down with serverless or with a server. I didn't want to have to provision a database or SQL. I really needed somewhere to store the scores of each team. I needed somewhere to put the team name, because actually that week the team names were changing like left and right, and people were, I'm either going to do it or not going to do it, and they were trying to submit images to me, and I didn't want to have to track it even in code. I didn't want to have to keep deploying code again to make static team names and at the last minute have things change. So what I did is I hooked up my leaderboard application that was built on Blazor and using those feature flags to Kontent by Kentico, because it's a headless CMS. It's powered in the cloud. It's SaaS based, and I could make a project there. I could make the idea of a team object. I could make a team with team name, and have a score associated with it. And I could actually pull through their API all that information out to power that leaderboard. And then I have button clicks on the teams that say add score, add score, add score, or move to next frame, because again, this like bowling idea of 10 frames. And there's a management API for me to get information back into that API and into that headless CMS. So if you haven't ever heard of headless CMS, I highly recommend checking it out, because it's all about being API first. It's all serverless. It's a fun way to work on almost any technology you want. It doesn't even have to be .NET. And if you haven't ever heard of one, really, I would recommend checking out Kontent by Kentico. And there's a link to kontent.ai. That's the website there where you can actually try it out. And I'll show it here in a second. But this tool, again, like I said, it's any technology you want. It really lines up well with .NET Core in MVC, Razor, Blazor. You can actually do it with Jamstack, and I actually gave a talk last week at another conference about static. It's a static site generator that can connect to headless CMS, and you can use Razor syntax to generate a static Jamstack-based site, and that's a really cool way to do things as well. So again, I think this is kind of the future of where web development is going. So if you haven't ever heard of it, I definitely recommend checking it out. Because what happens is you basically get another SDK, you add another NuGet package, and inside of like an MVC controller, you can actually kind of say, hey, I have a delivery client to Content's delivery API. I can grab that information out through one call, like what we're doing here of the row number 7 in that code screenshot of get items async by a certain type. And then that's going to return to me just like a database return, but it's instead an API return of simple objects, all strongly typed, all things that you can generate the models on your C# project automatically with, because there's a tool for that. And instead of actually just continuing to talk about it left and right, how about let's actually get into the full demo of how this all kind of comes together. So let me do that. So again, as I mentioned, there's the live reload flags in our Azure App Configuration. If I look at the app, when I have a bigger screen, it's actually responsive, so it shows a few more teams. This is the app that I've been talking about. So you can see the first place team here, Hungry Like a Wolf. They had a 10 because they were really good at it, and there's no frames left. Biz Steel is actually my team. So if I click to that team, there's a picture of my team who did the CrossFit Rowling thing. We did pretty well, and this is where during the event everyone would go in, and as they would click things, they'd say, hey, I actually got a 5 on this frame, so I can actually like add the scores. And what that's doing is it's pushing information back to Kontent for storing all that information. That's actually where I got the pictures and the name from as well. Or I could say I could go to the next frame if I was starting over, but the thing is done, so there's no frames left. So that's how we get to the leaderboard of teams. And again, this content is all powered by Kontent by Kentico. This is that same set of content we're just looking at, all those team names. And the one that I was actually just modifying just now, you can see I've got fields, structured fields that represent the team name, the team logo or team image, the score, and the frame that they're on. So in theory, the application, all it's doing is it's making a new version of this content, adding to the score. And what happens is as you make a piece of content, you make a new team, you actually get a code name in the API for it to say, hey, give me this piece of content through the API. So I can actually grab that code name, and I can hit, if I wanted to, I could directly hit the delivery API with my project. So I got to get that right. And again, this is just a sample read-only thing. And actually right there, I'm asking this API for that code name I just grabbed in, give me all that information. And that's what it did. So here's the same team name, team logo with where to pull the URL from. That's the URL of the picture. And that's the thing that kind of gets put right into this view in my Blazor app. And all that comes from Kontent, and I didn't have to worry about generating a server or provisioning a SQL database or worrying about maintenance and backups. All that's just handled for me on the headless CMS. But that's not the most important part of the demo. That's just the setup still. Each of these teams, this page is supposed to update as the score changes. And you can see I actually have a hint here that I have live reload enabled from earlier, or actually right now, from when we last hit it. This didn't exist when we did that event. For me, the site unfortunately pretty much crashed and actually just statically, the leaderboard stayed the same until I actually bounced it, like I said. So instead of kind of making it work in production, what I want to do is actually show you the code in dev that I have just running on my local machine. And I wanted to walk through how we're actually asking Azure App Configuration for those feature flags. How do you get that in your code base? And then how does it update? So we are in program.cs, but actually, I'm going to jump to startup.cs a second. So as I said, inside of configure services, you do your normal thing, right? You're adding your services. We're adding Azure App Configuration. We're adding feature management. Those, again, came from the 2 NuGet packages that we have in our CS proj reference. So that adds the service, so that way we can use the service inside of configure. Here we have the Azure App Configuration of use Azure App Configuration, and that's kind of turning it all on. But then actually that gets ultimately configured, like I mentioned, inside of program.cs, where we have create host builder. And I actually have this code checked into a repo, so I have a couple examples of, by default, when you first start Blazor, this is pretty much the only thing you get. You get these 4 or 5 lines of commented out code. That's the out-of-the-box way of, at least for .NET Core 3.1, that's how it came. Now in future versions, this is updated, especially with .NET 6. But again, that didn't have enough time to update everything to .NET 6 because it's coming out in actually like 4 or 5 days. So a couple other examples, but this is the real code that is running on dev. So I'm saying, you know what? Pull the environment of dev from my local environment variable that .NET Core gives us. Connect to the Azure App Configuration resource. I already have that in a secrets file on my local machine, so I don't have to worry about wherever that connection string is in my code base. I'm saying refresh based off a cache delay. And for our demo purposes today, I'm actually for 5 seconds. I'm saying go ask, is there a change every 5 seconds to that? And I'm actually saying, you know what? Also enable feature flags and make sure I'm looking for the labeled feature flag of development because we're running in development. Now to use the flags themselves, you actually kind of have to set up an enumeration, and it has to match exactly the Azure App Configuration. So I have public enum feature flags, and I have live reload, capital L, capital R. That actually literally has to completely match our configuration in our name. If one letter or case sensitivity is off, this whole thing falls apart. So that is the one dependency. I thought that was worth mentioning. So that is something I have in the code base in a couple spots. And here's how you use it. So this is on my index Razor component or Razor page, or well, Blazor page, however you want to say it. I'm actually saying use the feature manager that I've injected into this and say, is this enabled for live reload? So that's one line of code that says, go fetch the value. If we don't have it, return it and inspect it. And if it's true, I'm enabling the live reload on the Blazor dashboard. And if it's not true, I'm disabling the live reload. There isn't a whole lot of complexity there. I think that's pretty cool, right? We've got feature manager that is enabled async. And that's really all it took to basically be able to turn on or off features from somewhere else. So let's see what that does now that we've kind of explained it. So if I do a .NET run, and the localhost pops up, so we click it, come back over here. Okay, because we're running, and because I have the feature flag enabled for dev, I'm actually live reloading, and I put a date time in dev here to kind of represent that this thing is refreshing every couple seconds. So I have another part of the code base that's actually refreshing this piece of DOM every second or two. That's actually enabled because this checkbox is enabled. And if I come over, because this is all, I only have one headless CMS project that's connected to. If I come over here and I actually add a 20, and notice that, oh, I'm sorry, yeah, I'm actually at I'm still at the localhost version. So I added 20, I come back, and if we wait, I actually have the code only calling the headless CMS every like 30 seconds because I didn't want to bombard the API from the headless standpoint. What should happen is this thing should automatically fetch the new value, and bring it up. Sorry, I'm a little distracted because I've got a team notification there. We'll ignore that. All right, so what we're going to do is actually just refresh this. And you can see we've got 20, right? So the leaderboard will update itself if we give enough time. I just didn't want to wait any longer. And that's the basic premise of how this all works. The other thing that is going on that you'll notice is actually I'm logging every time that I check for the solution and whether or not I'm returning a new item. So here it actually returned on 4:14, which is a couple seconds ago. It returned the updated content. And I'm really doing this just for this demo purposes. So we've got the timer running. It's every second. Oh, it just asked again. And it keeps asking. And now, say there was a problem with it. Say it wasn't working. Instead of deploying code, what I can actually do is uncheck this. That kind of tells the Azure resource that that flag is now disabled. And if I come back over into the app, which is over here, I'm just going to refresh it again really quick. And again, there's a 5-second or so time where it may not ask for the new value. So let's actually make a whole refresh. Unless I have a breakpoint, which it looks like I don't. But what should happen here? Oh, there we go. So that I must hit the 5-second top or bottom. Now the live refresh is turned off. So the page is not asking for new values because, again, I toggled that inside of Azure. And the timer has stopped. So no longer are we like pinging for new data. And that's, again, all because I basically have a start and a stop live reload that's updating the Azure or the Blazor app. And that all is because I'm toggling or turning on or off the enabled flag here. So if I turn that on again, actually, just to show it again one more time, and we have to give it that 5 or 10 seconds that it might be caching the value for. And it's also not like 100% immediate real time. It's really close to real time. Let's see if we can get it to trigger one more time. Yeah, it's going to take there could be a slight like second or two delay on the Azure side of waiting for that new value to publish into the API. So try this one more time. Okay, so there. Now it's back. The clock is ticking again. That means the live reload is on. And actually, if we do this right, I'm actually going to try to update it from my phone this time without leaving the screen. So hopefully we can see that number go up. So I'm hitting it a couple times. We'll just see if I can get the number to go up while I'm talking instead of touching the screen. And that live reload should actually make this show based off how fast everything's going. And I got a delay of I think it's only checking every on the minute or maybe even every 30 seconds. So hopefully when we get to 4:17 here, the dashboard's going to update itself. And we should see like a 21 or 22 value. Oh, there's 22. So cool. So notice I didn't change anything. And now we have live reload. And that's a feature that I turned on through the configuration. I think that's pretty cool. I don't have to deploy code to turn features on and off. And that's why I really wanted to show the demo today. All right. So I'm going to go back to the talk second. And there was the demo. Again, if you're not familiar with Blazor, hopefully I would say go read up on it. Maybe you saw something at the Granite State Code Cape conference today about it, but there's definitely some benefits. Try to break them out a little bit. There's the developer experience. First of all, it's pretty awesome. There's the idea of components. You can put all the components into one single page if you want to, or you can break them out with code behind. You can put them in shared libraries. There's all sorts of new flexibility and freedom to the model, but actually it does make it very similar to creating a SPA. But yet again, you're using a ton of C# and you're even interacting with it through the DOM, through the interop that Blazor provides, if you're using Blazor Server, which is so far the one I like a little bit more. It's possible to use all one language, you're sharing code, and it supports all the things that you need to do to make a blazing fast experience once the site's loaded for your visitor. And I actually think the components themselves that you create, like the counter one that Scott Hanselman showed and the dashboard of the team one that I have, they're super simpler. I actually like the syntax style better than Angular and React, but maybe that's just me. I'm an old .NET developer. It's actually a pretty fast, somewhat better situation with .NET 6 when .NET 6 comes out next week because they worked on a ton on that. because if you're doing the WebAssembly version, you have to download the whole kind of framework with the app currently. Luckily, they're going to fix that any day now, hopefully. And it's definitely safe because it runs in its own sandbox. And server-side rendering helps with SEO as well. So there's a ton of other ways to work with it, whether you want to use different IDEs or CLIs or different tools. There's lots of third parties that you can do rich interactive UI that you don't have to roll your own from scratch. It's something that I think is kind of also be part of the future of the web. So I would check it out if you haven't. From there, there's a couple key benefits and takeaways of feature flag and feature management with Azure App Configuration. It's really the idea of being able to change the configuration, the control you have, and separate it out from deployments. And that's actually kind of, what I want to talk about the most is the fact that, in summary, I want you all to remember this. Number one, I'm terrible at CrossFit. Don't forget about that. This is what I look like at the end of the day most of the time. But number two, feature flags, it decouples functionality control from in the releases of when you want to push software changes away from deployment. And that's a best practice in my mind because we can control things at a very granular level. You've heard me say it a couple times. Blazor is pretty damn cool. I would definitely check it out if you haven't. So is Kontent by Kentico. It's a fantastic headless CMS that you can use to build websites and applications and other things. There's a link to go check it out. And really, that's the full show, everyone. If you have questions, like, wasn't this supposed to be about football, and why are you talking so much about CrossFit? Feel free to ask that. Can I really use C#? Yes. And where can I find out about things? I will kind of stop here for a second, just in case there are any questions, if anyone's out there still. And give it a second. I'm going to take a sip of water. All right. Doesn't seem to be any. So I would like to thank you all for listening. This is my contact information. I hope you've enjoyed watching feature flag management with Azure App Configuration, and hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. In fact, I guess in a couple minutes here, it looks like we're going to do closing ceremonies, and they're doing some giveaways. So in the Teams chat, I just saw that kind of pop up that Jim put in there. Feel free to jump on over to that, and I will stop sharing and let you all go.